Hello, my friend. Tonight we stand in the darkness before sunrise on a lonely limestone hill in southeastern Anatolia, where the earth has opened and revealed something that should not be here. The wind moves softly over the plateau. It carries dust, cold air, and the faint scent of wild grass. Below the hill, the land falls away into folds of stone and soil, pale beneath the fading stars. There are no city walls here, no palace towers, no written tablets, no royal tombs filled with gold. And yet, beneath the ground, carved pillars wait in silence, shaped by hands that lived before pottery, before metal, before the first known cities of Mesopotamia. In the half-light, Karahan Tepe does not feel like a ruin. It feels like a warning. A trench cuts through the ancient mound. Inside it, stone faces stare upward from a world more than 11,000 years old. Human heads rise from bedrock. Pillars stand in deliberate lines. Animal forms appear from the limestone, watchful and strange, as if they have been guarding this place since the first generations learned to gather in permanent numbers. A snake coils in stone. A fox seems to slip across a surface. A human figure, carved with quiet force, waits as though listening for footsteps that stopped coming long ago. The moment is still, but it is not empty. Somewhere in this darkness, the old story of civilization begins to tremble. For generations, people were taught that humans first learned to farm, then settled into villages, then grew wealthy enough to build temples, then organized into societies with leaders, rituals, and shared beliefs. Food first, cities later, gods later still. It was a clean staircase rising from survival to culture. But Karahan Tepe seems to whisper something different. Here, people who may still have hunted wild animals and gathered wild plants carved monumental spaces from living rock. Here, communities without writing brought labor, vision, and memory together in ways that feel startlingly organized. Here, long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, long before the first kings of Sumer, humans shaped a ceremonial world that asks a difficult question in the quietest possible voice. What if the need to gather around mystery came before the need to rule fields? The first light touches the hill. Slowly, the stones take form. The landscape changes from shadow to gray, then from gray to gold. Archaeologists move carefully across the site, brushing soil from carved surfaces, measuring stones that once belonged to a vanished ritual order. Every gesture is slow. Every layer matters. A single careless movement could erase a message preserved since a time when the world itself was changing. In one space, pillars stand like silent bodies. In another, a chamber descends into bedrock, with carved human heads arranged around it. They do not smile. They do not explain themselves. Their eyes are absent, yet their presence feels deliberate. They seem less like decoration than witnesses. And that is the unease of Karahan Tepe. It is not only old, it is intelligent. The stones do not look accidental. The spaces do not feel improvised. Someone imagined them. Someone chose where bodies would gather, where shadows would fall, where carved animals would emerge, where human forms would confront the living. Someone understood that stone could hold fear, memory, authority, and awe. Someone knew how to make a place feel more powerful than any individual standing inside it. There are no names to recover, no king list, no sacred hymn scratched onto clay. The builders left no written explanation of what they believed or feared. They left no voice that can be translated in the ordinary way. Instead, They left architecture. They left symbols. They left the arrangement of bodies in space. They left stone shaped into a language we can see, but not yet read. That is why the sight feels so haunting. Imagine the hill at night, not as a ruin, but alive. Fires burn low against the wind. People arrive from distant camps and settlements, walking through darkness with bundles, skins, stone blades, baskets, and food. They speak in languages now entirely gone. Children cling close to adults. Elders know the path. Hunters carry the memory of animals. Skilled hands know the weight of flint and limestone. And ahead of them, in the firelight, the carved stones wait. No one comes here casually. A place like this demands effort. It demands planning. It demands food for workers, knowledge of stone, shared stories strong enough to bring people back again and again. It demands agreement, or persuasion, or pressure. It demands that many people believe the same hill matters. That belief may be the first true monument. In the chamber, the air is cooler. Voices soften. Firelight touches carved surfaces, then slips away. The heads seem to appear and vanish. A pillar becomes a body. A shadow becomes an animal. The earth itself feels awake. For a people living at the edge of a new age, with climate shifting, animals moving, plants changing, and old ways of life becoming uncertain, such a place may have offered something deeper than shelter. It may have offered order, and yet, order can be frightening. The same stones that gather a community can also remind each person of forces beyond them: death, ancestors, animals, hunger, the sky, the turning of seasons, the strange power of memory. In a world without writing, ritual is not a luxury. It is a way of keeping the universe from falling apart. The sun rises higher now. The hill becomes quiet again. The fires are gone. The voices are gone. The hands that carved the pillars have been dust for thousands of years. But the work remains, and its survival feels almost impossible. Most human lives disappear without leaving a trace. Footprints vanish. Wood rots. Cloth decays. Names die. But stone waits. Karahan Tepe waited beneath the soil while empires rose and fell far away. It waited through the age of bronze and iron. It waited while cities became kingdoms, while temples gained priests, while armies crossed deserts, while scriptures were written, while monuments younger by thousands of years became famous across the world. It waited without asking to be remembered. Then the ground opened, and when it did, the old timeline no longer felt safe. The most unsettling discoveries are not always the loudest. Sometimes they come quietly, under a small brush, when a carved line appears where no carved line should be. Sometimes they come as a stone head emerging from dust, or a chamber cut from bedrock, or a pattern that proves ancient people were gathering with purpose far earlier than expected. The discovery does not shout. It simply stands there. Karahan Tepe stands there. It asks us to look at the beginning of civilization not as a neat invention, but as a long, uncertain awakening. It asks us to imagine people not as primitive shadows waiting for farming to make them human, but as minds already rich with memory, fear, imagination, and ritual power. It asks us to consider that before the first fields were fully tamed, before the first cities rose from mud-brick plains, people were already building worlds inside their minds, then cutting those worlds into stone. The hill is bright now. The morning has arrived, but the feeling remains. Something ancient has stepped out of the dark, and it does not fit comfortably inside the story we inherited. Beneath the calm surface of the stones lies a quiet rupture, a fracture in the familiar order of history. These people should not have built like this. This place should not feel so deliberate. These carvings should not speak so strongly across 11,000 years, and yet they do. Across vast plains of limestone and ochre soil, the land opens like a sleeping map. Southeastern Anatolia is not a small stage. It is a high, weathered world of ridges, basins, seasonal streams, and distant horizons, where the sky feels wide enough to hold an entire age of human beginnings. In spring, the hills can soften beneath green grasses and scattered flowers. In summer, the same slopes harden beneath sunlight, pale and dry, with stones bright as bone. The wind moves over everything, touching bare rock, low shrubs, and the faint tracks of animals that still cross the land at dawn. From this height, the eye travels far. To the south, the plains lean toward northern Mesopotamia, where future cities would one day rise beside the Euphrates and Tigris. To the north and east, mountains lift their dark shoulders into colder air. Between them lie routes older than roads, paths of animals, hunters, gatherers, traders, storytellers, and wandering families who knew the shape of the land by memory, scent, slope, and stars. This was not an isolated hill in an empty wilderness. It was part of a wider world. The region now known through the name Tash Tepeler, the Stone Hills, stretches across a landscape rich with prehistoric sites. Karahan Tepe stands among them, but it is not alone. Nearby, Göbekli Tepe has already astonished the modern imagination with its great circular enclosures and T-shaped pillars. Around them are other places, some excavated, some still waiting beneath the soil, each holding traces of human gathering, carving, ritual, settlement, or labor. Together, they suggest a landscape not of scattered accidents, but of repeated purpose. The distances matter. A person walking between these hills would not cross a blank space. They would move through a living geography of water sources, flint outcrops, wild grains, animal migration paths, and remembered places. The land itself was a web. Every ridge could be a marker. Every spring could be a meeting point. Every distant hilltop could carry a story told beside firelight. Long before maps were drawn, people carried maps inside their bodies. They knew where stone could be found. They knew when gazelles might pass. They knew which valleys held shade, which slopes held edible plants, which ridges offered a view of danger. This kind of knowledge was not written down, but it was precise. It had to be. A forgotten path could mean hunger. A missed season could mean hardship. A dry spring could send a group moving toward another band, another valley, another memory. And within this practical world, certain hills became more than useful. They became meaningful. Karahan Tepe rises in such a landscape, not as a city, but as a point of concentration. Its presence suggests movement toward it from surrounding places. People may have come from camps, hamlets, seasonal settlements, or neighboring communities scattered across the region. They may have arrived in small groups, each carrying local customs, local stories, local alliances, and local tensions. When they gathered, the hill became larger than its stone. It became a meeting ground for many worlds. Imagine the approach from far away. There are no paved roads, no carts with wheels, no written signs naming the destination. The journey follows shallow valleys, animal paths, and the memory of those who have come before. The travelers carry tools made from flint and bone. They bring food wrapped in skins or packed in baskets. They move slowly, watching the land. A child sees the hill first and points. Adults fall silent for a moment. The place is still distant, but already it has begun to act upon them. This is how scale works in a prehistoric world. It is not measured only by miles. It is measured by effort, anticipation, and return. A hill reached after a long walk becomes powerful because the body remembers the difficulty of reaching it. A gathering place becomes sacred not only because of what is built there, but because people arrange their lives around the journey. Repetition turns distance into devotion. Far beyond one enclosure, this region formed a corridor between ecological worlds. To the west and south lay warmer zones, where wild cereals grew in abundance during favorable periods. To the north were uplands with different animals, woods, and seasonal resources. The Euphrates flowed as a great artery, shaping movement and memory. Even without boats in the later historical sense, rivers mattered. They guided travel. They drew animals. They offered water, reeds, fish, and crossings. They connected landscapes that could otherwise feel separate. The stone hills sat near the threshold of these worlds. That threshold may help explain their power. Places between environments often become places of exchange, not only exchange of goods, but of songs, marriage partners, techniques, stories, and ritual obligations. A flint blade made from a distant source could carry with it the reputation of the people who shaped it. A carved symbol could be recognized from one hill to another. A feast could seal peace, competition, debt, or alliance. But the wider the network, the greater the mystery. How did people without centralized cities coordinate monumental work across this region? How did they decide which forms mattered? Why do certain animal images, pillar forms, and ritual spaces appear with such force? The landscape seems to hold fragments of an answer, but not the whole answer. It gives us patterns, not voices. Still, the pattern itself is powerful. Karahan Tepe belongs to a world in which human groups were becoming more connected, more settled, more symbolically ambitious, and perhaps more socially demanding. The scale was not imperial. There were no marching armies, no tax collectors on roads, no scribes counting grain in royal storehouses. But there was another kind of scale, older and quieter. It was the scale of shared imagination spread across hills. That scale can be harder to see. An empire leaves inscriptions. A prehistoric network leaves echoes. It leaves similar stones on different heights. It leaves food debris from gatherings. It leaves worked flint, shaped rooms, carved creatures, and construction choices that required cooperation. It leaves the impression that people who lived far apart still understood something in common, something strong enough to bring them together around stone, fire, and memory. The land itself becomes the archive. In the silence of evening, the plateau changes again. Shadows gather in the shallow valleys. The last light rests on ridgelines. Far off, a flock of birds crosses the sky. One can imagine smoke rising from different places, each fire belonging to a group with its own elders, its own dead, its own fears for the coming season. Between those fires lay paths. Between those paths lay obligations. Between those obligations lay the beginnings of something vast, not a city, not a kingdom, something earlier, more delicate, and perhaps more difficult to understand. The stone hills show us that civilization did not rise from a single spark in one place. it gathered slowly across landscapes where people learned to return, recognize, compare, and remember. Karahan Tepe was one node in a constellation of sacred and social places, set within a world of rivers, wild herds, distant ridges, and human footsteps crossing the same ground again and again. The scale of the story is not only in the stones, it is in the space between them. It is in the long walk from one hill to another, the exchange of glances between strangers who knew the same symbols, the shared meal under an open sky, the cold night spent near a place that seemed older than any living person. It is in the realization that before walls enclosed cities, meaning may have already enclosed entire landscapes. Under the wide Anatolian sky, the hills remain still, but around them, an invisible world begins to appear, broad, connected, and alive with movement. The stones are only the visible peaks of something larger buried beneath time. Around Karahan, Tepe lies not emptiness, but a vast human horizon, filled with paths, gatherings, animals, rivers, memory, and the first quiet architecture of belonging. Who were they? The question sounds simple at first, almost childlike, as if a name might be waiting somewhere under a stone, preserved in darkness, ready to be lifted into the light. But at Karahan Tepe, there is no royal inscription to answer us. No carved sentence says, "We built this." No tablet lists the clans, the ancestors, the makers, the singers, the dead. The people remain unnamed, and because they are unnamed, they seem to stand at the edge of history like figures seen through mist. Yet they were not shadows. They had bodies warmed by fire and chilled by night air. They had children to feed, injuries to tend, tools to sharpen, memories to carry, and stories to repeat carefully so they would not be lost. They knew laughter, fear, hunger, grief, and wonder. They may have known the exact cry of a bird at dusk, the taste of certain seeds after roasting, the dangerous mood of a wounded boar, the safest way to cross a stony valley after rain. Their world was not primitive to them. It was full. Still, the name of their people has vanished, so we must ask differently. Not only who were they, but how did people without writing leave behind a place that feels so organized, so deliberate, and so heavy with meaning? Were they hunters who began to settle more often? Were they ritual communities gathering from many places? Were they early villagers bound together by shared ceremony? Or were they something more difficult to name? A society standing between mobile life and permanent settlement, between old ways and a new human experiment. The silence is not empty. It is crowded with possibilities. Where did they come from? The answer begins in movement. Their ancestors had lived through great climatic change, through cold and warmth, abundance and scarcity, open grasslands and shifting woodlands. For many generations, people followed animals, gathered wild plants, and learned the rhythms of different territories. They did not wander without knowledge. They moved according to memory, season, kinship, and necessity. The land was not a blank wilderness, but a known world stitched together by paths. From such movement, more lasting attachments began to form. Certain places drew people back. A reliable spring, a hill with wide visibility, a slope where wild grain grew thick, a source of good flint, a burial place, a meeting ground, a place where the elders said the boundary between the living and the unseen felt thin. Slowly, return became habit, habit became memory, memory became obligation, and obligation could bind people as strongly as walls. But why this region? Why these hills? The answer lies partly in geography and partly in human imagination. The surrounding world offered resources, but resources alone do not create carved pillars or sunken chambers. Wild grain can feed a group. Flint can cut meat or shape wood. Water can sustain a camp. But none of these things automatically explain why people decided to carve human heads from bedrock or raise monumental stones in arranged spaces. For that, something else was needed. A shared vision had to take hold. How did they rise? Not with conquest in the later sense. There is no need to imagine bronze swords flashing beneath banners, or kings sending laborers under threat of punishment. Their rise may have been quieter and stranger. It may have come through gatherings that grew larger over generations, through ritual specialists who remembered sacred stories, through skilled carvers whose work inspired awe, through feasts that joined groups together, and through spaces designed to make people feel part of something larger than family. Power can begin without a throne. It can begin when one person knows the ritual words and another controls the timing of a ceremony. It can begin when certain families are trusted to prepare food for gatherings. It can begin when a builder understands stone better than others, when a hunter brings a rare animal, when an elder speaks for the ancestors, when a place becomes known as the place one must visit at the turning of a season. In such ways, influence gathers slowly. At Karahan Tepe, power may have lived in repetition. People returned. They carved again. They gathered again. They entered spaces that had already been made meaningful by those who came earlier. Each visit deepened the authority of the place. Each ceremony made the next ceremony more necessary. In a world without written law, shared ritual can become a kind of constitution. It tells people who they are, where they belong, and what must not be forgotten. And yet, another question waits beneath the stones. Why did their world change? No human order remains still forever. Climate shifts. Animals move. Plants flourish or fail. Groups grow larger. Neighbors become rivals. Children are born into expectations their grandparents never knew. What begins as a gathering may become a demand. What begins as shared awe may become pressure. What begins as memory may harden into obligation. Even a sacred place can become heavy. The world around Karahan Tepe stood near one of the greatest transformations in human life. The slow movement toward farming and settled villages. This was not a single invention made in one bright moment. It was uneven, experimental, and often uncertain. People learned the habits of plants over many generations. They watched where seeds fell, where grasses returned, where animals could be managed, where storage mattered. The boundary between gathering and cultivation may have blurred long before anyone would have called themselves a farmer. Such change would have touched everything. Food affects movement. Movement affects kinship. Kinship affects ritual. Ritual affects authority. Once people stay longer in one place, they must solve new problems. Waste, conflict, storage, labor, inheritance, and memory become sharper. The dead remain nearby. The living build over older places. A hill becomes layered with human decisions. Every season asks people to choose between the familiar path and the new settlement. Karahan Tepe belongs to this trembling threshold. What did they leave behind? They left no epic poem. They left no law code. They left no image with a caption telling us the name of a god. What they left is more difficult and, in some ways, more powerful. They left architecture that rearranged the human body in space. They left carvings that turned animals and humans into symbols. They left evidence of cooperation before the usual signs of civilization. they left a wound in the timeline. They also left humility, because the more closely we look, the less comfortable the old certainties become. It is tempting to place ancient people on a ladder beneath ourselves, as if they waited in darkness for agriculture, writing, cities, and states to teach them complexity. But places like Karahan Tepe disturb that ladder. They show minds already capable of abstraction, coordination, fear, performance, symbolism, and sacred design. The mystery is not that they were human. The mystery is how fully human they already were. To ask who they were is to ask what civilization really means. Is it crops? Is it writing? Is it permanent settlement? Is it hierarchy? Or can civilization begin as an agreement around memory, ceremony, and shared imagination, long before kings learned to carve their names into stone? The answer does not come easily. It rises slowly, like morning light over limestone, revealing shapes but leaving shadows between them. Karahan Tepe does not give us a finished explanation. It gives us a set of questions carved into place. Who gathered here? What did they fear? What did they hope to control? What did they see in animals, ancestors, and stone? Why did they spend such effort on spaces that seemed to belong not to shelter, but to meaning? And why, after all this time, do these questions still feel alive? Because they are not only questions about them, they are questions about us. To understand this world, we must go back to a time when the earth itself was changing its breath. The last great cold age was loosening its grip. Ice still held distant regions in silence, but across Western Asia, the climate had begun to shift in uneven pulses, sometimes warmer, sometimes drier, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. The land did not transform all at once. It trembled between old and new conditions. Grasslands expanded and withdrew. Woodlands moved across slopes. Spring strengthened, then weakened. Animals followed food, and humans followed animals, water, seeds, and memory. For people living near the hills of southeastern Anatolia, the landscape was never simply background. It was the first teacher. Every valley carried instruction. Every season left a lesson. A dry year taught caution. A wet year taught abundance, but also temptation. A herd passing through a familiar corridor reminded hunters of ancestral roots. A stand of wild einkorn or barley ripening on a slope showed how the earth could feed those who returned at the right moment. Long before formal fields, people watched plants with an attention sharpened by hunger. They learned by noticing. The world around Karahan Tepe belonged to a zone of remarkable possibility. Not far away were the upper reaches of the great river systems that would later nourish Mesopotamia. The highlands gathered rain and snow. The plains opened toward warmer lands. Wild cereals grew in patches that could be harvested. Pistachio, almond, and other useful plants existed within reach in favorable environments. Herd animals moved through the region, including gazelle, wild sheep, wild goat, and aurochs, each demanding a different kind of knowledge. This was not an easy paradise. It was a landscape of opportunity and risk. A person could live well here, but only by understanding time. Seeds ripened briefly. Animals migrated according to patterns that could change. Water was precious. Stone for tools had to be found, selected, shaped, and carried. Firewood had to be gathered. Children had to be protected from snakes, cold, falls, and hunger. Elders held knowledge that could not be replaced quickly. The loss of memory could be as dangerous as the loss of food. In such a world, survival was intellectual. The people who moved through these hills were careful observers of animal behavior, weather signs, stone qualities, plant cycles, and human relationships. They read the earth without writing. A footprint in dust told a story. A broken twig could mean recent movement. A cloud bank over distant hills might change a plan. The call of birds could reveal water or danger. Nothing was meaningless, and slowly, the old rhythms began to tighten around certain places. During the long ice age, many human groups across the wider region had lived with mobility as a central strategy. Movement gave flexibility. If one valley failed, another might provide. If herds moved, people moved. If a gathering place became unsafe, families could leave. But as climates shifted and rich local zones appeared, some communities began to stay longer in favored areas. Not forever. Perhaps. Not at first. But longer. Length of stay changes the human mind. A place visited for a few days is useful. A place revisited for generations becomes remembered. A place where children are born, elders die, and food returns each year can become part of identity. Stones gain stories. Springs gain personalities. Paths gain obligations. The land ceases to be merely crossed and begins to be inhabited in imagination, even before houses become permanent. This is one of the quiet roots of Karahan Tepe. The hill rises from a world where people were beginning to return with greater force. Return allowed memory to accumulate. Memory allowed meaning to deepen. Meaning allowed labor to become more than practical. When a community believes a place matters, it can invest in that place beyond immediate survival. It can carve. It can gather. It can shape stone for reasons that belong to ceremony, fear, identity, and the unseen. But the environment did more than invite settlement. It also created pressure. At the end of the Ice Age, the climate did not simply grow kinder in a smooth line. There were disruptions. One especially severe cold and dry interval, known by scholars as the Younger Dryas, brought stress to many regions. In places where wild resources had become important, sudden scarcity could change everything. People might gather more intensely at reliable locations. They might defend access to food. They might experiment with managing plants. They might seek ritual answers for ecological uncertainty. When the world becomes unstable, people often search for order. That order may be practical, such as storage, planning, and cooperation. It may also be symbolic, expressed in ceremonies that ask the living to align themselves with powers beyond ordinary control. Rain, animals, birth, death, and seasonal return are not small matters to people living close to the land. They are the structure of existence. A failed season is not an inconvenience. It is a threat to children. The roots of monumentality may lie in such tension, not only abundance, not only leisure. Perhaps uncertainty itself drove people to gather, remember, and build. A carved chamber does not fill a stomach, but it can hold a community together. A pillar does not make rain fall, but it can focus hope, fear, and obligation. A ritual place does not guarantee survival, but it can make cooperation feel sacred. In dangerous times, that may be powerful. Across the limestone hills, bedrock waded close to the surface. This mattered. The builders did not need to transport every stone from distant mountains. The earth itself offered workable material. Limestone could be cut, shaped, and transformed. But stone does not carve itself. Hands had to strike, scrape, grind, polish, and plan. Tools of flint and other hard materials had to meet the rock again and again. Every mark required intention. Every finished form condensed hours of labor into silence. The physical environment gave possibility. Human imagination gave form. The deep origins of Karahan Tepe are therefore not found in a single cause. They rise from a meeting of climate, animals, plants, stone, memory, and social need. A changing world made old habits less certain. A rich region made gathering possible. Returning to important places made shared identity stronger. Limestone gave people a medium through which thought could become architecture. Fear and wonder gave the work emotional force. In the quiet before farming had fully remade human life, these conditions gathered like clouds. A family moving across the hills might not have understood that they stood near the beginning of a transformation. They would have known smaller things: the weight of a basket, the ache of feet after a long walk, the relief of finding water, the smell of roasting seeds, the stories spoken when darkness came. Yet history often begins inside such ordinary moments, long before anyone recognizes its shape. The ancient world did not announce itself. It accumulated. A path became familiar. A spring became trusted. A hill became remembered. A gathering became expected. A carving became sacred. Under these slow pressures, people who had long lived with movement began to root themselves in meaning before they rooted themselves fully in fields. The land shaped their bodies. The seasons shaped their choices. The animals shaped their imagination. The stone shaped their memory. And from this deep landscape, something new began to rise. Far from the great stone spaces, life begins with smaller sounds. A fire cracks in the gray light before dawn. Someone crouches beside it, feeding dry twigs into the embers with practiced care. Smoke rises slowly, blue and thin, carrying the smell of ash, roasted seeds, and animal fat. Around the fire, bodies stir beneath skins and woven coverings. A child wakes and listens. Outside, the hill country is still cold. The day has not yet decided what it will become. This is where the world of Karahan Tepe becomes human. Not in the carved pillars alone, but in the hands that reached for water before sunrise, in the shoulders bent over grinding stones, in the fingers that sorted edible seeds from bitter ones, in the hunter checking the edge of a flint blade, in the older woman remembering where the best plants grew after the winter rains, in the young person learning to strike stone and failing many times before the first sharp flake comes away clean. Their lives were not simple. They were dense with skill. To live before metal, pottery, and written records was not to live without knowledge. It meant that knowledge had to be carried in bodies, gestures, voices, and memory. A toolmaker could read stone by touch and color. A tracker could see a story in disturbed dust. A gatherer knew which roots nourished and which roots harmed. A healer might know leaves that soothed pain, resins that sealed wounds, and the dangerous signs of fever. Every ordinary task contained inherited intelligence. Food shaped the rhythm of days. Wild cereals could be gathered when the season allowed, cut with stone blades or pulled by hand, then carried back in baskets or skins. Nuts and fruits added sweetness and strength when they were available. Meat came through patience, risk, and cooperation. Gazelle, wild sheep, wild goat, hare, birds, and other animals entered human life not only as food, but as movement, story, bone, sinew, hide, and symbol. Nothing was wasted lightly. A bone could become a point. Sinew could bind. Hide could cover a sleeping child or wrap a bundle. Horn and antler could be worked into tools. Fat could feed a flame or soften skin. Even the act of butchery was a kind of reading, a practiced sequence of cuts learned across generations. The animal was taken apart with knowledge, but perhaps also with attention, because creatures that fed people could become creatures that haunted their imagination. That may be why animals later stared from stone, but daily life was not only labor. It had warmth, rivalry, humor, tenderness, and memory. People sat together while repairing tools. They listened as elders told stories of storms, hunts, strange births, distant hills, and the dead. Children learned by watching, imitating, asking, and being corrected. A child who could not yet carry much might gather small sticks, hold a cord, or follow an older sibling. Learning began before instruction had a name. Identity began close to the body. Scars mattered. Hairstyles may have mattered. Ornaments made from stone, shell, bone, tooth, or bead could mark belonging. Age, beauty, skill, exchange, or memory. A pendant might travel farther than the person who wore it. A shell from a distant place could carry the mystery of far landscapes. A pierced tooth could hold the memory of a hunt. A small object, worn against the skin, could say what words alone did not. The community was a living archive. Without books, the past survived through repeated acts. How to shape a blade, how to prepare a hide, how to mourn a death, how to greet visitors, how to share meat, how to approach a sacred place. These things endured because people performed them again and again. A mistake could be corrected. A forbidden act could be remembered. A generous act could become a story. Reputation moved with the person, and perhaps with the family. Death stood near. In small communities, death was never abstract. The dead were known faces. They had voices that had recently spoken, hands that had recently worked, places beside the fire that suddenly became empty. A death changed the arrangement of the living. It created grief, but also questions. Where had the person gone? Did the dead remain near? Could they see? Could they help? Could they harm? Did they require food, attention, burial, or remembrance? Burial customs in such worlds were never merely practical. To place a body, cover it, return to it, or treat parts of it in special ways was to speak to the invisible through action. The ground could become a threshold. The skull could become an object of memory. A grave could anchor a group to place. The dead might become ancestors, and ancestors might become authority. When the living gathered at important places, they may have carried not only food and tools, but obligations to those who had vanished. This gives quiet depth to the carved human forms. A human head in stone is not simply an image. It may be a memory without a name, a presence without breath, a face made permanent in a world where flesh disappeared quickly. For people who watched bodies return to earth, stone offered another possibility. Stone endured. Stone could hold a person, a spirit, a warning, or a power in place. It could make absence visible. Even domestic life carried ritual. A meal could be more than eating. Sharing meat after a hunt could confirm bonds. Roasting seeds together could mark abundance. Preparing food for visitors could turn strangers into allies. Feasting, even on a modest scale, could change relationships. Those who provided food gained honor. Those who received it accepted obligation. Around the fire, social life thickened. A full stomach could make agreement easier. A withheld portion could make conflict sharper. Trade and exchange widened the horizon. People did not need markets to value distant things. Flint of unusual quality, colored stone, shells, pigments, animal products, and stories could move from group to group. Exchange was not always commercial in the later sense. It could accompany marriage, alliance, visiting, ritual gathering, or debt. An object carried from far away proved that the world extended beyond the nearest ridge. It made distance touchable, and distance stirred imagination. A traveler might bring news of another group, another ceremony, another animal movement, another death, another strange stone place. In this way, communities did not live sealed inside their own valleys. They listened outward. They compared. They borrowed. They competed. A carving style seen in one place could inspire another. A ritual remembered from a gathering could be retold beside a smaller fire until it became part of local life. Still, most days remained close and physical. Feet on rough ground, smoke in the eyes, cold mornings, warm stones at midday, the rasp of grinding, the spark of flint, the smell of wet hide, the low murmur of voices at night, a baby crying, a dog-like animal perhaps lingering near scraps, a hunter returning late, someone looking toward the hills, wondering whether the others had arrived. The world was intimate, but never small. Above these communities stretched the immense sky. Around them moved animals with their own hidden roots. Beneath them lay stone that would outlast every living body. Within them lived stories strong enough to call people together. Their society was built from food, kinship, craft, memory, grief, exchange, and awe. No single part explains the whole. But together, they created the human ground from which monumental meaning could rise. Before a pillar was carved, a hand had to learn patience. Before a chamber was entered, a child had to learn fear and wonder. Before a gathering became sacred, people had to know what it meant to belong. The roots of great ritual lay in these quieter lives, in the daily making and mending of a world where survival and imagination were never far apart. The fire burns lower, morning fully arrives. Someone lifts a basket. Someone sharpens a blade. Someone speaks the name of a place on the hill, and the others understand. The day begins in ordinary labor. But beneath the ordinary lies something deeper, a shared sense that the visible world is only one part of existence, and that beyond the firelight, in stone, animal, death, and memory, another world is waiting to be answered. At first, no one wears a crown. Authority begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the space between need and trust. A person who remembers the old paths is followed when the group must move. A skilled hunter is listened to when the herd is near. A woman who knows how to store seeds safely is valued when hunger comes. An elder who can speak the names of the dead holds a different kind of weight, one not carried in the arms, but in the voice. Power does not always arrive with force. Sometimes it gathers around usefulness. In the communities near Karahan Tepe, leadership may have grown from ordinary dependence. People needed those who could organize labor, settle disputes, judge seasons, prepare ceremonies, and remember obligations between families. A small group can survive by informal agreement. A larger gathering cannot. Once many people arrive from different places, each with their own habits and expectations, someone must decide where food is placed, when work begins, who enters a space, and what actions are forbidden. These decisions leave no inscriptions, but they leave architecture. A chamber cut into bedrock is not made by accident. A line of pillars is not raised by a passing mood. A carved animal is not created between one meal and the next. Such work requires direction. Someone sees the shape before others see it. Someone says the stone must be cut here, not there. Someone persuades tired hands to continue. Someone remembers how the space was used last season and insists that it must be prepared again. This is the beginning of organized authority. Not a state, not a kingdom, not law written on clay, but authority all the same. Perhaps it belonged to ritual specialists, people who understood the ceremonies and guarded the order of actions. Perhaps it belonged to elders whose long memories connected living groups to the dead. Perhaps it belonged to master builders who could transform limestone into forms that frightened and impressed. Perhaps it shifted among them, depending on the moment. A hunt required one kind of command. A burial required another. A great gathering required many. The important change was not that one person ruled everyone. The important change was that shared projects made leadership necessary. When a group carves stone together, labor must be arranged. Tools must be prepared. Food must be gathered in advance. Workers must be fed while they are not hunting or gathering for themselves. Young people must be taught where to strike. Older people must judge whether the work is correct. Mistakes can waste days of effort. A broken pillar can become a social failure, not only a technical one. From this pressure, rank may begin to appear, not rank as later kings knew it, with armies and palaces, but subtle rank. Some people stand closer to the sacred center. Some speak while others listen. Some know the hidden meaning of animal forms. Some distribute food. Some handle the dead. Some are allowed to carve, while others carry stone dust away. Inequality may begin as responsibility, then slowly harden into privilege. This is one of history's quietest dangers. The same system that helps people cooperate can teach them obedience. A ceremony that unites a community can also tell each person where they belong. A feast that celebrates abundance can remind everyone who provided the meat. A sacred place open to many may still contain spaces restricted to a few. Without written rules, boundaries can be enforced by memory, fear, shame, and awe. A voice can become a law before law has a name. Imagine a gathering on the hill during a season of return. Groups arrive from different directions. Their clothing, ornaments, and accents may differ. They bring food, flint, hides, stories, and expectations. The air is alive with greeting, suspicion, excitement, and comparison. Children stare at strangers. Young adults notice possible partners. Elders measure the mood carefully. Every meeting holds opportunity, but also the risk of insult. Someone must guide the gathering. The organizers may begin with food, where meat is roasted, where seeds are stored, where water is kept. Who eats first and who receives the finest portions all matter deeply. Food is never only food in such a setting. It is respect, debt, alliance, memory, and display. To feed many people is to show power. To accept food is to join a web of obligation. Then comes the movement into ritual space. The crowd changes. Voices lower. Bodies arrange themselves. Some stand outside. Some enter. Some watch from above. Perhaps certain gestures are repeated, known from earlier gatherings. Perhaps a chant begins, or a rhythm made by hands, feet, stone, or bone. Firelight moves over carved surfaces. The stones do not speak, but the people act as if something is present. In that moment, authority becomes more than management. It becomes sacred. Those who control the ritual control the meaning of the gathering. They can tell people why the animals matter, why the ancestors must be honored, why certain places cannot be touched, why a sacrifice or feast must occur, why work must continue, why the community must return. Such explanations do not need to be false to be powerful. They may be deeply believed by those who speak them. Belief and authority often grow together. Beneath this surface of order, however, tension never disappears. A young hunter may resent an elder's command. A family may feel cheated in the distribution of food. A visiting group may question why another group holds greater access to the chamber. A carver may gain admiration that unsettles ritual leaders. A failed season may weaken confidence in those who claimed to understand the unseen world. Authority must constantly prove itself, especially when it is not backed by permanent force. That may be why monuments matter. Stone gives authority a body. It stands when leaders sleep. It remains when voices fade. It tells newcomers that the rules did not begin yesterday. A carved chamber says, "Others came here first, and they accepted this order." Pillars say, "Labor has already been given, and more labor is expected." Animal forms say, "The powers invoked here are older and stronger than any argument around a fire." Architecture makes memory difficult to refuse. At Karahan Tepe, organized power may have lived in precisely this relationship between people and place. The hill did not need walls to influence behavior. The arrangement of stone could guide bodies. The descent into a carved space could change the mood. The presence of human heads could make the living feel watched. A person entering such a place might feel that ordinary disagreement no longer belonged there. This is how early authority becomes durable. It attaches itself to the sacred landscape. Taxes in the later sense may not have existed, yet contributions surely did. Food had to be brought. Labor had to be given. Tools had to be made. Time had to be surrendered. A family that refused might not face a prison, but it could lose honor, allies, marriage ties, or access to ceremonies. Social pressure can be as binding as rope when survival depends on belonging. Fortifications are not the only signs of control. Sometimes control is seen in coordination. It is seen in repeated building forms, in shared symbols, in the ability to gather people at the same place across time. It is seen when a community does difficult work for reasons beyond immediate hunger. It is seen when stone becomes a center around which human lives rotate. No king was needed for this, but neither was complete equality. The first power structures of this world may have been woven from respect, fear, memory, skill, age, ritual knowledge, and control over gatherings. They were probably flexible at first, shaped by circumstance and personality. Yet with every return to the hill, with every ceremony repeated, with every stone carved deeper into the earth, the pattern grew stronger. For a while, the world may have seemed balanced. The hunters brought meat. The gatherers brought plants. The toolmakers shaped flint. The elders held memory. The ritual leaders opened the sacred spaces. The builders cut the stone. Each role supported the others, and the hill gathered them into a single order. But inside that order lay the first outline of something that would one day shape all civilizations: the power to organize belief. And once belief can organize labor, history begins to move differently. No name survives for the one who first imagined the stone taking human shape. There is no statue with an inscription, no grave marked with honor, no story preserved in a later language. The figure must remain unnamed, not because such a person never existed, but because time has closed over the names of everyone who stood on that hill. Still, in the quiet evidence of carved limestone, It is possible to sense the presence of a mind that looked at the living rock and saw more than material. Someone saw a body waiting inside it. Perhaps this person was not one individual, but a lineage of skilled makers. Perhaps the vision passed from teacher to apprentice, from elder to child, from one careful hand to another. Yet every tradition begins with a moment of daring. Someone must be first to say that a pillar can stand like a person. Someone must claim that the stone head should emerge here, from the bedrock, facing those who enter. Someone must believe that the unseen world can be given edges. At dawn, such a person might have walked the hill alone. The air would be cold, the limestone underfoot pale and rough. Below, smoke might rise from sleeping shelters, thin and uncertain in the early light. The master of stone, if we may call them that, would not look like a later architect with drawings and measuring cords preserved in a workshop. Their tools would be simple by later standards, but their understanding would be deep. They would know where stone fractures. They would know how sound changes when rock is struck well or badly. They would listen with their hands. A flint tool hits limestone. The mark is small. Another strike follows. Dust gathers. A line appears, then deepens. Stone resists. It always resists. To carve is to argue with the earth slowly. The body tires. Fingers split. Shoulders ache. One mistake cannot be undone. Every curve must be coaxed from a surface that offers nothing freely. A viewer sees the finished form, but the maker lives through the long struggle between vision and hardness. This struggle gives the work its authority. A carved form is proof of patience. It tells the community that someone held an image in the mind long enough to force it into the world. That ability can inspire unease. People who transform stone seem to cross a boundary. They do what others cannot. They make the permanent resemble the living. They bring faces from rock. In a society where memory, death, and ritual matter deeply, such skill could become more than craft. It could become power. The unnamed master may have learned first from practical work, shaping tools, cutting channels, smoothing surfaces, helping prepare spaces for gatherings. But at some point, technical skill entered the realm of symbol. A mark became a sign became an animal became a presence, a human head became a witness. The maker did not merely decorate the place. The maker changed how people felt when they stood inside it. That is a different kind of leadership. A strong hunter commands attention during danger. An elder commands attention through memory. A ritual speaker commands attention through sacred knowledge. But the carver commands attention through transformation. They alter the environment itself. Once their work is complete, even absent, they remain influential. The carved stone continues to act. It stares, surrounds, guides, and unsettles. Imagine the first unveiling. People gather at the edge of a newly shaped space. The stone dust has been cleared. The surfaces are fresh, lighter than the weathered rock around them. Fire may flicker nearby, though the sun is still above the horizon. The maker stands back. Perhaps they are proud, perhaps afraid. The community approaches and sees that the earth has gained a face. For a moment, no one speaks. This silence is the victory. The image has done what words could not do. It has created a shared feeling without explanation. Awe passes through the group. Some may see an ancestor. Some may see a spirit. Some may see danger. Some may feel that the dead are closer than before. The power of the form lies partly in its openness. It can hold many meanings at once, and each person leaves with the sense that something has been revealed, though no one can fully say what. From that moment, the maker is changed. People may seek their judgment. They may ask where the next carving should be placed. They may bring stone, food, or assistance. Young people may want to learn from them. Elders may want to guide or control them. Ritual leaders may draw them close, because a sacred story becomes stronger when stone gives it shape. The maker's gift becomes valuable, and valuable gifts are never socially neutral. Admiration can become dependence. Dependence can become danger. What happens when a carver's vision challenges an elder's memory? What happens when one group claims the maker belongs to them, while another insists the sacred space belongs to all? What happens when people believe the carved forms are not only made by human hands, but chosen by powers beyond human control? A gifted person can unify a community, but also disturb its balance. The unnamed master stands at this dangerous crossing. They are not a king, yet their work gathers people. They are not a priest in any formal sense, yet their forms may guide ritual. They are not a warrior, yet their stone beings can command fear. They are not a scribe, yet their symbols outlast speech. Their authority is not based on possession of grain or metal or armies. It grows from the ability to make meaning visible. In many early societies, such people may have been surrounded by ambiguity, respected, but watched, needed, but not entirely trusted, close to the sacred, and therefore close to risk. The same hand that brings an ancestor from stone might be feared for awakening something that should have remained hidden. The same mind that designs a chamber might be suspected of knowing paths between worlds. Great creativity often carries this shadow. The work at Karahan Tepe suggests that some individuals, or groups of specialists, had already learned how to think beyond immediate utility. The carvings are not tools in the ordinary sense. They do not cut meat, grind seed, or scrape hide. They work upon emotion, memory, and social order. They create settings in which people behave differently. They make a gathering feel ancient even while it is new. That is a profound human achievement. It means someone understood atmosphere, stone placement, enclosed space, carved bodies, and controlled movement all shape perception. A person descending into a chamber feels differently from a person standing under open sky. A face emerging from bedrock creates a different tension from a loose object held in the hand. A pillar rising taller than a body changes the scale of the human self. These choices reveal not only craftsmanship, but psychological insight. The master of stone knew how to make people feel small, and perhaps, in that smallness, connected, yet the figure remains unreachable. We do not know whether they were male or female, young or old, gentle or severe, admired or feared. We do not know whether they laughed often, limped from an old injury, lost a child, remembered a famine, or dreamed of animals. We do not know whether they believed they invented the forms, or whether they felt the forms came through them from an older, hidden source. The absence of a name may be fitting, because the true subject is not one heroic individual, but the emergence of a new human role, the visionary maker, the organizer of stone, the person who turns labor into sacred experience. Before architects signed monuments, before sculptors were praised in courts, before priests wrote hymns beside temple walls, someone stood on a limestone hill and discovered that shaping space could shape society. The sun moves across the plateau. The carver returns to work. Again, the tool strikes. Again, dust rises. Around them, people bring water, carry stone chips, watch, whisper, learn. The form is not finished. Perhaps it will take days. perhaps seasons, but the community has already begun to change around it. The unfinished carving pulls attention toward itself. It creates expectation. It makes people imagine the completed shape before it exists. This, too, is power. The ability to make others wait for a vision. In the slow patience of limestone, a new kind of leader appears without a throne, without writing, without a name. Their monument is not only the carved stone, it is the gathered attention of the people around them, the quiet acceptance that something extraordinary is being made, and that when it is finished, no one will walk through the sacred space in quite the same way again. The first great victory was not a battlefield. No army appears on the ridge with shields lifted against the sun. No fortress gate breaks beneath a ram. No defeated king is dragged through dust. The triumph at Karahan Tepe belongs to an older kind of history, quieter, slower, and perhaps more astonishing. It is the moment when many separate human lives agree to shape one place together, and in doing so, create a space that none of them could have made alone. A hollow is chosen in the limestone. At first it may be only a surface, rough and pale, warmed by day and chilled by night. People stand around it, speaking in low voices. Some see ordinary rock, others see possibility. A line is marked. A boundary is imagined. The place is no longer merely ground. It has become a promise, and promises can be heavy. The work begins with impact. Stone tools strike. Chips break away. Dust rises into the air and settles on skin, hair, and lashes. The sound repeats across the hill, sharp, patient, and rhythmic. Strike, pause, clear, strike again. The first cuts seem small against the mass of bedrock, but small acts accumulate. A surface lowers. A wall takes shape. A chamber slowly descends from the living stone, not built upward like a house, but released downward. As if people are uncovering a room the earth had hidden inside itself. This matters. To build with loose stones is one kind of achievement. To cut into bedrock is another. It fixes the sacred space to the hill itself. It says this place cannot be carried away. It does not rest upon the earth. It belongs within the earth. The builders are not merely arranging materials. They are entering into a long negotiation with the body of the land. The labor would have required planning beyond the reach of a single household. Someone must prepare tools. Someone must bring food. Someone must maintain water supplies. Someone must decide when enough workers are needed and how long they can be spared from hunting. Gathering, childcare, and daily survival. The making of a great enclosure is therefore also the making of a social machine. It tests whether memory, belief, and obligation can move bodies together. At first, the work may seem impossible. The stone is stubborn. Hands blister. Tempers rise. A tool breaks. A young worker strikes badly and is corrected. An elder complains that the line is wrong. A carver studies the surface, waiting for the shape to reveal itself. Food is consumed faster than expected. A cloud of flies gathers around scraps. At dusk, the unfinished hollow looks unimpressive, more wound than monument, but the people return. This is the victory hidden inside the victory. The triumph is not only that the enclosure is eventually made. The triumph is that the work continues after the first exhaustion. It continues after arguments. It continues after ordinary life. Demands attention. It continues because the place has begun to hold them, even unfinished. The chamber changes the hill. It creates expectation, and expectation creates commitment. With each day, the space becomes more defined. A curve appears. A floor is leveled. Stone features rise from surfaces intentionally left behind. Pillars or standing forms take on presence. Human shapes and animal signs begin to emerge. The workers are no longer cutting anonymous rock. They are approaching a vision that others can now see. Children who watched the first strikes may return to find a place transformed. Elders may sit nearby, remembering when the surface was unmarked. Such transformation alters time. The community can now divide memory into before the cutting and during the cutting. The place becomes a shared story in progress. People can say where they stood when the first line was marked. They can remember who broke a tool, who brought meat, who sang during the hardest work, who died before the chamber was complete. The monument gathers biography into architecture. Then comes the moment when the enclosure is ready to receive people. Perhaps it is not finished in the modern sense. Ancient sacred places often grew through use, alteration, repair, and renewal. But there comes a point when workers stop being only workers and become participants. The space has crossed an invisible threshold. It is no longer a project. It is a place. The first gathering inside must have changed everything. Imagine bodies entering carefully, one by one or in small groups. The air is different below the level of the surrounding ground. Sound changes. Voices become enclosed. Footsteps feel deliberate. The walls hold shadow even when daylight remains above. Carved forms appear at the edges of sight. A human head seems to wait near the boundary between stone and flesh. An animal figure, fixed forever in motion, catches the light. People who stood scattered across the hill are now gathered within a designed world. That design gives the moment force. A ritual space controls attention. It narrows the field of vision. It separates those inside from those outside. It makes each gesture visible and meaningful. Someone stepping forward is noticed. Someone speaking is heard differently. Food placed in such a space is not merely food. A bone, a skull, a blade, a flame, a basket of seeds. Each can become charged by location. The enclosure turns ordinary objects into ritual instruments. This may be the first major victory of Karahan Tepe, the creation of a setting where the community could experience itself as more than a collection of families. Inside stone, people could feel the presence of ancestors, animals, unseen powers, and one another. They could enact belonging. They could confront fear together. They could remember the dead in a place that seemed strong enough to hold them. Outside, the world remained uncertain. Animals still had to be found. Plants still followed seasons. Children still fell ill. Rain still failed or came too hard. Rival groups still watched one another with caution. But inside the enclosure, for a while, uncertainty could be given shape. The frightening disorder of life could be arranged around pillars, carved heads, repeated gestures, and shared silence. That is a profound human invention, not a tool for cutting, not a shelter from rain, a tool for gathering minds. The first successful enclosure would also have changed relationships beyond the ritual itself. Those who helped build it had a claim to memory. Those who directed the work gained prestige. Those who entered it participated in a shared order. Visitors who had not helped might feel awe, envy, or obligation. A place made by many hands could become powerful enough to attract still more hands. Success creates momentum. Once one chamber proves that such work can be done, another possibility opens. If stone can be shaped here, perhaps it can be shaped again. If people can be gathered for this, perhaps they can be gathered for more. If a carved space can hold fear and wonder, then the community has discovered a way to make meaning durable. The victory is therefore not final. It is generative. A battle ends when one side yields. A monument begins another history the moment it stands. It draws people back. It asks to be maintained. It becomes a stage for future ceremonies and disputes. It carries the memory of labor into every gathering. The enclosure is complete enough to use, but alive enough to demand continuation. In the fading light, after the first great ceremony, the hill grows quiet again. Ash cools. Footprints remain in dust. The stone surfaces, newly exposed, hold the last warmth of the day. People drift away in small groups, speaking softly. Some carry leftovers. Some carry stories. Some turn once more to look at the carved space before descending toward their shelters or distant paths. They have made something that was not there. More importantly, they have felt what it is like to stand together inside it. That feeling may have been the true victory. It could outlast hunger for a night, outlast argument for a season, outlast the hands that cut the rock. It could travel in memory to other hills and other fires, retold by those who had entered the stone and emerged changed. The enclosure remains behind, silent and waiting, but the people who leave it are not quite the same. Paths begin as faint decisions. A foot presses grass down. Another follows. A slope is crossed, then crossed again. A dry stream bed becomes familiar. A ridge becomes a guide. Over seasons, the land remembers movement in ways too subtle for stone, yet strong enough to shape human life. Around Karahan Tepe, the widening world of sacred hills was held together not by roads, not by written commands, but by footsteps repeated until distance became relationship. The first travelers did not move through emptiness. They moved through named places, though the names are gone. A spring with cold water, a bend in a valley where animals passed, a stand of trees that offered shade, a dangerous crossing after rain, a hill where smoke could be seen from far away. Each place carried practical value, but also memory. A child walking with adults would learn not only where to step, but what had happened there, who had once camped there, where a death occurred, where a feast was remembered. In this way, the landscape became spoken before it was built. Karahan Tepe's power grew within this wider movement. People who gathered there did not leave their home places behind in any permanent sense. They carried them. They brought accents, gestures, tools, ornaments, stories, rivalries, and claims of descent. A person arriving from one valley might recognize someone from another through marriage ties or old exchange obligations. Another might arrive as a stranger, watched carefully until food, speech, and custom made their intentions clearer. Every meeting carried both promise and danger. A gathering could create friendship, but also comparison. Who brought the finest flint, who wore the rarest bead, who had taken the largest animal, which group knew the most powerful songs, which elders spoke with confidence, which carvers had made forms others admired. Prestige could travel along the same paths as shells, stone, meat, and rumor. This is how expansion may have begun, not with conquest, but with attraction. A powerful ritual place draws people because it offers more than ordinary survival. It offers contact with a shared mystery. It offers a chance to be seen by others. It offers access to alliances, marriage partners, feasts, stories, and ceremonies that make life feel larger. Those who return from such gatherings carry descriptions with them. Their words become invitations. Their memories become proof. The hill grows in reputation before anyone sees it. Far across the stone hills, other places may have answered. One site holds a certain arrangement of stone. Another develops a chamber with different emphasis. A third preserves animal imagery that feels related, but not identical. This does not mean a single authority controlled the whole region. It suggests something more flexible, a shared symbolic atmosphere in which communities borrowed, adapted, competed, and recognized one another through forms. Similarity created belonging. Difference created identity. A fox carved in stone might speak across distance. So might a serpent. So might a human figure standing with unsettling stillness. These images may have moved before they were carved. A hunter sees an animal in a dangerous moment and tells the story. A ritual speaker links that animal to death, fertility, cunning, protection, or transformation. A carver turns the story into stone. Visitors remember the figure and describe it elsewhere. Another maker reshapes the image in a new place. Over time, symbols travel through mouths, eyes, hands, and ceremonies. The network becomes a conversation without writing. Trade helped carry that conversation. Flint of fine quality could move from source to settlement. Stone beads could pass between groups. Pigments might be exchanged for hides or food. Animal products could mark relationships. Even perishable things now lost. Baskets, cords, wooden objects, feathers, skins, and plant fibers may have circulated with meanings we can no longer recover. The surviving stone is only the hardest part of a much softer world. Objects do not travel alone. They carry stories about their makers. A blade from another region might be admired not only for sharpness, but because it came from people with respected skills. A bead might mark participation in a gathering. A pigment stain on skin could show ritual belonging. A distinctive tool form could reveal where someone learned their craft. In a world without written documents, style itself becomes a signal. It tells others where you have been, who taught you, and who may stand behind you. The more these signals spread, the more people could imagine a larger community. Not everyone had to know everyone. They only had to recognize enough shared signs to feel that they belonged within a broad ceremonial horizon. A traveler seeing a familiar carved creature on another hill might feel both surprise and reassurance. The world was wider than the home valley, yet not entirely foreign. Somewhere beyond direct kinship, a new kind of social world was forming. This required trust. It also required rules. When strangers gather, peace cannot be assumed. Food can be stolen. Insults can ignite violence. Marriage arrangements can anger families. Ritual precedents can be disputed. Hunters may compete for the same animals. Young people may challenge older authority. The very act of bringing many groups together creates the need for customs that reduce danger. Shared ceremony may have served this purpose, turning potential rivals into participants under a common order. A feast could calm the edge of suspicion. A ritual could make strangers stand in the same silence. A carved chamber could remind everyone that the gathering belonged to powers greater than individual anger. In this sense, sacred spaces may have been instruments of diplomacy. They gave communities a place to meet without being absorbed into one another. They allowed alliance without empire. They allowed difference beneath a roofless sky of shared symbols. Expansion through ritual is slow, but powerful. It does not require a capital city. It does not require soldiers at borders. It works by desire and obligation. People want to attend because the gathering matters. They need to attend because absence may weaken ties. They return because others return. Each journey strengthens the path. Each path strengthens the place. Each place strengthens the story that binds the region together. But as the network grows, so does expectation. A small ceremony can be spontaneous. A larger gathering demands preparation. Food must be accumulated. Sleeping places must be considered. Tools must be made or repaired. Disputes must be managed. The sick, young, and old must be protected during travel. Timing must be agreed upon. A seasonal gathering becomes a social engine, and an engine must be fed. This brings new pressure to daily life. If a group is expected to contribute meat, failure becomes visible. If another group is known for skilled carving, they may be called upon repeatedly. If one lineage claims old rights at the sacred hill, others may accept, resent, or challenge that claim. Expansion widens belonging, but it also widens comparison. The larger the circle, the more delicate the balance. Still, for a time, momentum carries the world forward. People travel under dawn light, across dry hills and green seasonal valleys. They arrive with the dust on their legs and stories in their mouths. Fires multiply across the gathering ground. Smoke rises in many threads. Children stare at unfamiliar ornaments. Elders sit together, measuring one another's words. Hunters display meat. Carvers examine stone. Ritual leaders prepare spaces whose meaning has grown deeper with every return. At night, the wider network becomes visible as sound. Voices overlap. Songs move between fires. Laughter rises, then fades. Somewhere, someone tells of a distant hill where another carved form waits in darkness. Someone else describes a valley rich in wild grain. A marriage is discussed. An old grievance is softened. A new obligation is made. The world expands not through maps, but through stories carried from one human circle to another. Karahan Tepe becomes part of this living movement. Its stones hold people in place for ceremonies, but its influence travels when they leave. The hill sends memory outward along the paths. Those memories return with new people, new gifts, new ambitions, and perhaps new tensions. In such circulation, sacred geography becomes social geography. The land is no longer a scattering of sites. It is a patterned world of return. The stars above the plateau remain unchanged to the eye. Below them, however, human life is knitting itself into something wider. Not yet cities, not yet states, not yet kingdoms with borders drawn in dust and blood. Instead, a web of hills, paths, feasts, carvings, exchanges, and remembered obligations spreads across the land, delicate but persistent. A civilization before civilization does not need streets to expand. It needs places people cannot forget. A system can exist without a single written word. It can live in hands, footsteps, seasons, gestures, and remembered obligations. It can be carried by elders who know the order of a ceremony, by builders who understand where a pillar should stand, by food gatherers who know how much must be prepared, and by visitors who know when to arrive. At Karahan Tepe, power did not need ink or clay tablets to become durable. It needed repetition. Repetition is one of humanity's oldest forms of government. A thing done once may be chance. A thing done many times becomes expectation. When people return to the same hill, enter the same spaces, bring food at the same season, honor similar symbols, and recognize familiar forms, they begin to live inside a pattern. That pattern guides behavior even when no one commands aloud. It teaches each person what is normal, what is sacred, what is dangerous, and what must be preserved. This is how memory becomes structure. The people of Karahan Tepe did not record their system in lists, but they built it into place. Architecture fixed certain movements into stone. A chamber invited descent. A narrow passage controlled approach. A standing form drew the eye. A carved head changed the emotional temperature of a room. The arrangement of space told bodies where to pause, where to look, where to gather, and where not to go. Stone became instruction. A person entering such a place would not behave as they would at an ordinary campfire. The setting required a different voice, a different pace, a different awareness of others. Even those who did not fully understand the inner meaning of the carvings could feel that the place demanded care. This is one reason sacred architecture can endure across generations. It teaches through experience before it teaches through explanation. The system also needed labor. Labor had to be summoned, divided, and sustained. Some people shaped tools, some carried water, some cut stone, some cleared debris, some prepared food, some watched children, some tended fires, some guarded the sequence of ritual acts. The work itself may have been occasional, organized around seasons of gathering, but it required a social agreement strong enough to interrupt ordinary routines. That agreement was not small. In a world where food security depended on timing, every hour mattered. A person cutting limestone was not gathering seeds. A person preparing a feast for visitors was not only feeding their own family. A skilled carver teaching another person was giving away knowledge that had taken years to refine. Monumental work therefore depended on surplus in the broadest sense, not only extra food, but extra trust. Trust can be stored, not in jars, not yet in ledgers, but in relationships. When one group contributes to a gathering, others remember. When a family brings meat in a hard season, their generosity becomes part of their name. When a lineage helps maintain a sacred space, their claim to honor grows. When visitors receive hospitality, they owe acknowledgement, return gifts, future help, or loyalty. The economy of the hill may have been built from such invisible balances. Nothing about this required coins. Value moved through meat, labor, rare stone, pigments, ornaments, skins, tools, and promises. But above all, value moved through prestige. To be known as generous mattered. To be known as skilled mattered. To be associated with a powerful ritual, place mattered. In the absence of writing, reputation could bind people across distance, because memory traveled with every returning visitor. Feasting may have been one of the system's central engines. A feast gathers bodies and concentrates emotion. The smell of roasting meat can soften suspicion. Shared food can turn an agreement into a remembered event. The distribution of portions can honor allies, reward workers, calm rivals, or display authority. Bones left behind may seem like refuse to later eyes, but in their own moment they were part of a social drama. The remains of decisions about who ate, who served, who watched, and who owed. Food made ritual visible. It also made organization necessary. Large gatherings required planning before hunger became urgent. Animals had to be hunted or managed in relation to the event. Wild grains and plants had to be collected and processed. Water had to be found. People arriving from different places had to be received. A ceremony without food might fail, not because belief was weak, but because bodies are fragile. The sacred and practical were never separate. A ritual leader who ignored hunger would lose authority. A generous provider without ritual legitimacy might gain influence too quickly. A builder who shaped the sacred chamber needed food from others. A hunter who supplied meat might expect recognition inside the ceremonial order. The system endured because different kinds of power depended on one another, and each corrected the excesses of the rest. Communication held it together. There were no written announcements, but messages traveled. A visitor carried news of a future gathering. A marriage alliance carried obligations between communities. A remembered lunar cycle or seasonal sign marked the proper time. Smoke, paths, spoken invitations, returning travelers, and kin ties all helped coordinate action. In such a world, a message was not abstract. It moved in a person's mouth and body, accompanied by trust in the messenger. A false message could harm many people, so reliability became precious. Those known to remember correctly held influence. Elders who could recite past agreements may have served as living archives. Ritual specialists may have preserved sequences of action that could not be altered without anxiety. Builders may have remembered measurements through proportion, touch, and repeated practice rather than numbers written down. Knowledge lived in trained attention. The system's laws were probably not laws in the later sense. They may have been prohibitions, customs, taboos, permissions, and obligations. Do not enter this space at the wrong time. Do not touch this form without authority. Bring food when called. Honor the dead in the proper manner. Share meat according to accepted rules. Respect the people who keep the ritual memory. Return when the season turns. Such rules can be powerful precisely because they are old, or because people believe they are old. A custom gains authority when its origin disappears. No one can easily argue with a rule said to come from ancestors, animals, spirits, or the first makers of the place. The absence of written records may even strengthen such authority, because memory becomes sacred and flexible at once. A skilled speaker can preserve tradition, but also reshape it carefully, claiming continuity while adapting to new pressures. This gave the system resilience. It could change without declaring change. A chamber could be altered. A carving could receive new meaning. A feast could grow larger. A role could become more formal. A path could become more important. As long as people experienced continuity, the system remained intact. The past was not a fixed document. It was a living performance. Yet performance demands participation. If people stop coming, the system weakens. If food fails, ceremonies shrink. If rival centers attract followers, authority thins. If younger generations doubt the old meanings, repetition loses force. Durable power before writing was strong, but it was also delicate. It depended on bodies gathering again and again, on memory being renewed before it faded. For a while, the system held stone, food, labor, ritual, reputation, and memory formed a quiet machinery of social life. It had no palace, yet it organized people. It had no script, yet it transmitted ideas. It had no tax office, yet contributions were expected. It had no army, yet behavior was controlled by awe, belonging, and obligation. It had no border, yet those who knew the symbols understood when they had entered its world. This is one of Karahan Tepe's deepest revelations. Civilization is not born only when someone invents writing. It begins when human beings create systems larger than immediate kinship, systems that survive individual lifetimes and shape people who never met their founders. It begins when memory becomes architecture, when ritual becomes order, when cooperation becomes expectation, and when a place can command the living through the silence of stone. Under the open sky, the hill seems still, but inside that stillness, a system is working. It is remembered in bodies. It is renewed in gatherings. It is carved into limestone. It moves along paths in the minds of travelers. It speaks without writing, governs without a throne, and teaches without a school. Its power is quiet, but real. And because it is real, it changes what human beginnings can mean. At its height, Karahan Tepe would not have looked like a city. There were no streets lined with shops, no dense neighborhoods rising in mud brick layers, no gates where officials counted carts and animals. It was something older and stranger, a place where the energy of settlement, ceremony, craft, food, and memory gathered without yet becoming urban life. The hill was open to the sky, but not open in the ordinary sense. It had centers. It had boundaries. It had places where bodies moved differently. Morning begins with smoke. Small fires burn across the nearby slopes and sheltered areas. People wake beneath coverings of hide, reed, grass, or woven fiber, materials that have mostly vanished into time. The air smells of ash, damp earth, worked skins, and crushed plants. Somewhere, seeds are being ground on stone. Somewhere else, a toolmaker sits in concentration, turning a nodule of flint in the hand, studying the angle before the first strike. The sound of work enters the day gradually. A child laughs, then is hushed. A dog-like scavenger circles the edge of a refuse place. A hunter checks a point, pressing a thumb carefully near its edge. Women and men sort food, repair cords, prepare skins, carry water, and speak with the ordinary urgency of people who have too much to do before the sun grows hot. The sacred hill is not silent because it is sacred. It is alive because sacred places require daily labor. This is the dawn before cities, a world where people gather in larger numbers, yet still live close to the land. A world where ceremony has become grand, but survival remains intimate. A world where no wall fully separates the ritual from the practical. The person who enters a carved chamber may also spend the afternoon cleaning a hide, carrying a basket, or soothing a crying child. The sacred is not distant from ordinary life. It presses against it from every side. At the center, the stone spaces wait. They are not simply decorations on the landscape. They are places prepared for attention. Their surfaces catch the changing light. Their forms hold shadow. Human features seem to emerge from the bedrock with unnatural patience. Pillars stand in positions that make the human body aware of its own smallness. The chambered spaces draw people inward, away from the wide horizon, into a world shaped by hands and memory. A visitor arriving at Karahan Tepe during such a flourishing moment might first notice the people, more than expected. Some are familiar with the place and move confidently across the ground. Others are newly arrived, dusty from travel, alert, watching for cues. Their ornaments differ. Their speech carries other valleys. A few bring rare materials, carried carefully because such things are more than useful. They are proof of distance. Shell, colored stone, unusual flint, feathers, hides, bone ornaments, and pigments may all move through this gathering world. Bright fragments of landscapes beyond sight, markets, in the later sense, do not yet exist here. But exchange does. A blade is admired. A pendant is touched. A story is traded for a memory. A piece of meat offered at the right moment becomes an alliance. A marriage discussion begins in careful language. A dispute over past obligation is softened by food. People do not merely gather to worship. They gather to renew the social fabric, and the sacred setting gives that fabric weight. At midday, the hill changes. The sun grows hard and high. Shadows shrink beneath bodies and stones. Work slows. People seek shade where they can. Children are pulled away from dangerous edges. The air above the limestone trembles. From the height, the surrounding country spreads outward in muted colors: yellow grasses, pale rock, darker strips where moisture has lingered, distant rises blurred by heat. The vastness beyond the hill remains present. It reminds everyone that life here depends on the wider land. No gathering place feeds itself. Every ceremony rests upon the labor of those who hunt, collect, process, carry, and share. The most impressive stone chamber cannot exist apart from cracked hands at grinding stones or feet walking long distances for water. Splendor, even in this early world, is built upon repetition. Yet there is beauty in that repetition. A group of people sit together shaping beads. Another prepares plant fibers into cord. Someone smooths a bone tool until it gleams softly. A young apprentice watches flint being struck, learning from the rhythm of failure and correction. The hill is a workshop as much as a ritual landscape. Skill gathers here. Techniques are compared. A better method travels home in the memory of a visitor. This is how a golden age can look before gold. Not wealth piled in palaces, but richness of connection. Not jeweled crowns, but shared symbols recognized across distance. Not grand avenues, but paths leading to a hill known by many communities. Not written literature, but stories repeated with care under night skies. Not temples staffed by bureaucracies, but sacred spaces maintained by the bodies and beliefs of those who return. In the late afternoon, preparation deepens, food is arranged, fires are strengthened, meat may be roasted, smoked, divided, or displayed. Seeds are cooked into forms now lost to us, perhaps softened, pounded, mixed, heated on stones, or shared in baskets. The smell spreads across the gathering ground. Hunger brings people closer. So does anticipation. A ceremony may come with darkness, or with the low sun, or with a sign recognized by those who know the proper sequence. The mood shifts before anything formal begins. Voices lower. Tools are set aside. Bodies wash or are marked with pigment. Ornaments are adjusted. The elders gather. Those with ritual knowledge move with deliberate calm. Children sense the change and become watchful. Visitors who do not know the full order look to others for guidance. The hill, busy all day, becomes suddenly attentive. This is when architecture does its quiet work. The carved spaces receive the living. The descent into stone feels different in evening light. Shadows lengthen inside chambers and along carved surfaces. A human head appears more strongly when light comes from one side. An animal shape seems to move as flame flickers. Pillars become presences rather than objects. The place teaches through atmosphere, and atmosphere needs no translation. For a while, the world seems still. Then a sound begins. It may be a voice, a drum-like strike, a rhythmic step, a chant, a breath repeated by many. We do not know the exact form, but human ceremony almost always needs sound, because sound joins bodies in time. People who breathe, sing, stamp, or listen together become aware of one another differently. In a darkened stone space, sound can make the invisible feel close. The golden age of Karahan Tepe may have lived in moments like this, not in permanent brightness, but in concentrated experience. A gathered community enters a space made by remembered labor. They stand among carved beings that seem older than themselves. Food, travel, fear, hope, rivalry, grief, and obligation are drawn into one charged setting. For a brief time, the separate burdens of life become part of a larger order. Such moments do not erase suffering. They give suffering a place. A mother grieving a dead child may stand among others and feel the dead are not wholly lost. A hunter ashamed by failure may participate in a ceremony that restores belonging. A young person nearing adulthood may be brought into a space where the symbols of the community become personal. An elder near death may see the stones and know that memory can outlast flesh. This is wealth beyond objects. Night settles slowly over the hill. Fires brighten. The sky opens above with stars undimmed by any city. The carved spaces fall into deeper shadow. People eat, speak softly, sing, remember, and watch. Beyond the immediate glow, the land is dark. Animals move unseen. Distant groups may be traveling still. The air cools, and the heat leaves the stone. Karahan Tepe, at its height, is not a city of walls. It is a city of attention. Its streets are paths of memory. Its wealth is gathering. Its palace is the hill. Its archive is the human mind. Its art is carved into limestone and carried in stories. Its festival is the return of many bodies to a place where stone, animal, ancestor, and sky seem to meet. In such a world, civilization is not yet a word, but the feeling of civilization is already there, in the coordinated labor, the shared symbols, the crafted spaces, the exchange of goods and stories, the rituals that bind strangers into participants, and the quiet belief that human life can be arranged around something greater than immediate need. The night deepens. The fires burn low, somewhere inside the darkness. The stones continue to watch, and the people sleep nearby, held by a world they have made together. The people of Karahan Tepe lived beneath a sky filled with signs. The sun returned with steady authority, rising over ridges and withdrawing behind the land in fire-colored silence. The moon changed its face, vanished, and came back. Stars appeared in their seasons, patient and distant, while birds crossed the air in patterns no human hand could command. On the ground, animals moved with equal mystery. Serpents slid through grass and stone. Foxes appeared at the edge of firelight. Vultures circled above death. Wild herds flowed across the land as if guided by an intelligence beyond sight. For people who lived close to nature, these things were not scenery. They were powers. A modern eye may look at a carved animal and call it art. That word is useful, but too small. At Karahan Tepe, animals carved into stone may have carried fear, memory, identity, warning, and sacred force all at once. A fox was not merely a fox. It was cunning movement at twilight, a thief near refuse, a watcher from the boundary between camp and wilderness. A serpent was not merely a reptile. It was suddenness, danger, renewal, the hidden life of cracks and earth. The animal world surrounded human life with intelligence. To hunt an animal, one had to understand it. To survive near dangerous creatures, one had to respect them. To eat from the bodies of animals, one had to confront dependence. These relationships could never be only practical. The creature that fed a child might also appear in dreams. The animal that killed a hunter might become a story repeated for years. The bird that fed on the dead might become a messenger between worlds. The boundary between human and animal was not fixed in the way later thinkers often imagined. Humans wore skins. They carried bones. They imitated calls. They followed tracks. They dreamed of creatures. They became hunters by entering the habits of animals and predicting their movements. In ritual, that closeness may have deepened. A person marked with pigment, wearing feathers, teeth, or hide, standing beside a carved animal, might seem to cross the border between forms of life. Such crossings can be frightening. They can also be sacred. The human figures at Karahan Tepe add another layer of unease. Heads emerging from stone may speak of ancestors, captives, spirits, or transformed beings. They may show the importance of the head as the seat of identity, memory, sight, breath, and presence. When a body dies, the face is the last place where the living search for the person they knew. A carved head preserves that searching in stone. The face is intimate. It is also dangerous. A face can accuse. A face can watch. A face can bless or shame. In a ritual chamber, human heads fixed in bedrock may have made the living feel surrounded by those who had crossed beyond ordinary life. Perhaps they represented revered ancestors. Perhaps they evoked the dead more generally. Perhaps they were not portraits at all, but presence is shaped to remind each visitor that the living community was only one part of a larger order. Death, in this world view, may not have been an ending. It may have been a change of location. Many early societies treated the dead as active participants in the world of the living. The dead could protect, warn, demand, or punish. Ancestors could legitimize land claims, social roles, marriage ties, or ritual authority. The memory of those who came earlier could make present decisions feel ancient and necessary. In a world without writing, the dead were among the strongest archives. A skull, a burial place, or a stone head could make ancestry visible. This does not mean we know exactly what the builders believed. Their myths are gone, their songs are gone, their names for animals, stars, winds, and spirits have vanished. Yet the carved world they left suggests that they did not see human life as isolated. The living stood among animals, ancestors, earth, sky, and unseen forces. The world was crowded. Every meaningful place had depth. Sacred places are often designed to make that depth felt. At Karahan Tepe, a person entering a carved space may have experienced a controlled descent from daylight into another kind of atmosphere. The open land above belonged to movement, work, and horizon. The chamber belonged to concentration. Stone walls held sound. Shadows changed the carvings. Firelight could make an animal seem awake. A human head could appear suddenly as the eye adjusted. Such experiences shape belief. People do not only believe ideas because they are told. They believe because places teach the body. A narrow entrance can create anticipation. Darkness can sharpen fear. Repeated gestures can quiet thought. Standing among others can make private emotion collective. A carved symbol seen at the right moment can become unforgettable. The universe of Karahan Tepe may have been taught through such moments. Perhaps children first heard stories outside the sacred space. They learned that certain animals mattered, that certain stones must not be touched, that certain times carried danger or blessing. Then, at the proper age or during the proper gathering, they entered the chamber and saw those stories made solid. What had once been told beside fire became stone around them. Childhood memory became adult belonging. Education may have worked through awe. Social order may have worked the same way. In many human communities, worldview and hierarchy are woven together. If certain elders speak for ancestors, then ancestry supports authority. If certain carvers shape sacred beings, then skill becomes honored. If certain groups control access to ritual spaces, then sacred geography creates social rank. Belief is never only about the invisible. It arranges the visible world, too. Gender roles may also have been held within this order, though the evidence remains difficult. Daily life required the labor of all: food gathering, processing, childcare, tool repair, hide working, hunting, teaching, healing, and ritual preparation may have overlapped in ways that later categories cannot capture neatly. Some tasks may have been associated more strongly with men, women, elders, youths, or specialist roles. But the sacred world likely drew on all bodies, because no community can maintain ceremony without the work of many kinds of people. The moral code of such a society may have centered on balance, share correctly, remember the dead, respect the powerful places, do not disrupt the ritual order, honor obligations between groups, control anger during gatherings, give when expected, return when called, teach the young, follow signs in animal movement, season, and sky. These rules may never have been written, but they could have been felt as deeply as any later law. The sacred universe did not float above life. It entered meals, journeys, marriages, hunts, burials, and building projects. A failed hunt might require explanation beyond poor luck. A sudden illness might be understood in relation to unseen imbalance. A successful gathering might confirm that the ritual order remained strong. A strange dream could matter. A rare animal sighting could become a sign. Meaning was not separate from survival. It helped survival make sense. And yet, mystery remained, even within their own worldview. The people of Karahan Tepe may not have believed they fully understood the powers around them. Sacred places do not erase uncertainty. They give people a way to approach it. A serpent carved in stone does not make danger disappear. A human head does not solve death. A ritual under the stars does not command the heavens absolutely. It allows humans to stand before what they cannot control and feel less alone. That may be the deepest purpose of the carvings. They made relationship visible, between human and animal, between living and dead, between sky and earth, between fear and order, between memory and stone. The people who gathered at Karahan Tepe may have looked upon the universe as a network of presences, where every creature and every place could hold meaning. They did not live in a silent world of objects. They lived in a speaking world, even when the language belonged to wind, bones, tracks, stars, and dreams. Night returns over the hill. The fires are small beneath the immense sky. A fox moves beyond the edge of light, seen for a breath, then gone. Somewhere in the grass, a serpent passes unseen. Above, birds have vanished into darkness, and the stars appear with their old, cold brightness. In the carved chamber, stone faces wait without blinking. For the people who shaped them, the world was not divided between nature and spirit. It was one continuous mystery. At its strongest, Karahan Tepe wasn't powerful because it owned land in the later sense. Its strength was stranger. It rested in the ability to gather imagination across distance. It lived in the fact that people came, returned, remembered, and spoke of the hill as a place that mattered. It lived in hands willing to cut stone, in families willing to bring food, in visitors willing to enter spaces shaped by rules older than any one life. Its reach could not be measured by walls or armies. It was measured by attention, and attention is one of the earliest forms of power. A hill that can draw people away from ordinary routines has already changed their lives. A ritual center that can make distant groups coordinate travel, food, gifts, and ceremony has already created influence. A carved chamber that can make strangers lower their voices has already shaped behavior. Karahan Tepe, at maximum power, stood at the heart of this quiet command, a place where stone, memory, and gathering had become stronger than the needs of a single camp. The surrounding landscape may have seemed open and free, but invisible lines connected it. Paths led toward the hill from valleys, springs, ridges, and seasonal settlements. Not all of these paths were physical tracks. Some were lines of obligation. A family might feel expected to appear at a gathering because their ancestors had done so. A skilled maker might be summoned because their craft had become tied to the sacred spaces. A young person might long to visit because stories had filled the place with danger and prestige before their eyes had ever seen it. Power begins long before arrival. It begins in anticipation. Those who controlled or maintained Karahan Tepe's ceremonies may have understood this. The hill did not need to be constantly crowded to remain influential. Between gatherings, it worked inside memory. People could speak of it while grinding seeds, shaping blades, preparing skins, or walking across dry ground. They could compare other places to it. They could remember a ceremony there with awe, fear, or pride. The hill lived in speech, even when empty. This is how sacred centers become larger than themselves. At peak influence, Karahan Tepe may have stood as one of the major ritual anchors in a regional world of related sites. Its forms did not exist in isolation. The symbols, carved spaces, and monumental effort belonged to a broader atmosphere of shared experimentation. Communities were learning how to make places that outlived ordinary shelters, how to bind people through ceremony, and how to turn bedrock into social memory. Yet Karahan Tepe had its own force, its carved human heads, its striking stone spaces, and its careful shaping of the hill gave it a presence that would have marked the mind of any visitor. A person returning home could describe the descent into stone, the stillness of the carved faces, the strange nearness of animal and human forms, the feeling that the ground itself had been opened. Such stories could travel farther than the people who first heard them. Fame did not require writing. It required repetition and wonder. At this height, the society around the hill may have felt confident in its order. The ceremonies had been performed before. The roles were known. The builders understood the stone. The food providers knew what was expected. Elders carried memory. Ritual specialists guided sequence. Visitors recognized the seriousness of the place. Children watched and learned. The system had become familiar enough to feel permanent. But nothing human is permanent. For a while, confidence hides fragility. The very success of Karahan Tepe may have increased its demands. More visitors meant more food. More ceremonies meant more preparation. More prestige meant more competition. More stonework meant more labor. A sacred place grows heavier as it grows famous. The hill that once gathered small groups around a shared mystery could become a center of expectation that required constant renewal. Maximum power is often the moment when weakness first becomes difficult to see. In the full glow of influence, people may believe the world they have made will continue because it has already endured. The ceremonies worked last season. The gatherings drew people. The stones stood. The ancestors were honored. The animals returned. The stories still held. Such continuity can feel like proof that the order is blessed, natural, and unbreakable. Yet continuity is also work. Every season must be carried into the next. Imagine the hill during a great gathering at the height of its reputation. People arrive in waves, some from nearby places, others from beyond the familiar horizon. The air is filled with movement. Fires multiply. Food is prepared in greater quantities. The smell of roasted meat drifts over limestone. Flint blades flash briefly in the sun. Ornaments catch light against skin. Elders sit in circles, speaking with the measured patience of people who know they are being observed. Prestige moves everywhere. A famous hunter is greeted with respect. A carver from a distant place studies the stone with quiet intensity. A young woman wearing rare beads becomes the subject of whispers. A ritual speaker stands near an entrance, not blocking it with force, but with presence. Children sense who matters by watching how adults shift. Pause and listen. No throne is visible, yet hierarchy breathes through the gathering. Some people approach the most important spaces with confidence. Others wait. Some handle sacred objects, while others only look. Some speak in the ritual moment, while others answer or remain silent. Some distribute food. Some receive it. The order may not be cruel. It may even feel necessary and beautiful. But it is order, and order always places people. This is how the civilization before civilization reached its strongest form, not as a state, but as a ceremonial commonwealth of memory, skill, exchange, and awe. Its wealth was not stored in granaries alone, though food mattered deeply. Its wealth was stored in repeated participation. It was stored in the belief that the hill could connect the living with animals, ancestors, and powers beyond ordinary sight. It was stored in the willingness of people to act as if that connection was real. At maximum power, the physical sight and the social world became inseparable. The stones gave authority to the gatherings. The gatherings gave meaning to the stones. Without people, the carvings were silent. Without the carvings, the gathering lost one of its deepest sources of force. Each depended on the other. Together, they created an experience powerful enough to survive in memory across generations. But power built on belief must be continually renewed. A drought can test it. A failed hunt can test it. A quarrel between important groups can test it. A death at the wrong moment can test it. A rival hill with stronger ceremonies can test it. A young generation drawn toward new ways of living can test it. Confidence may remain calm on the surface, while doubts begin to move underneath like water through cracked stone. Still, during its strongest age, the doubt may have been faint. The hill would have seemed alive with purpose. The chambers prepared. The carvings watched. The people came. Night ceremonies carried sound into darkness. Smoke drifted upward beneath stars. Distant communities recognized the importance of the place. Skilled hands maintained it. Stories returned to it. Children grew up hearing its name and knowing it belonged to the order of the world. For those who stood there, this may have felt like a rival. A human world had been made from stone and memory. The gathering was no longer fragile or new. It had become an institution without paper, a monument without a king, a center without city walls. Karahan Tepe's greatest power was not to command bodies by violence, but to persuade minds that this hill stood near the center of meaning. That is a delicate kind of greatness. It can shine for generations, and under the bright confidence of its strongest days, beneath the smoke of feasts and the still gaze of carved faces. The first small shadows of change may already have been present, too quiet to name, but real enough to wait. Beneath the surface of order, pressure begins quietly. It does not arrive as a single disaster. It gathers in small frictions, almost too ordinary to notice. A feast is harder to prepare than it once was. A hunting party returns with less meat than expected. A family complains that its labor is taken for granted. A young carver questions an older design. A visiting group waits too long outside a sacred space and remembers the insult. The stones stand calmly, but people do not. Every system has a weight. At Karahan Tepe, that weight may have grown as the sacred hill became more important. What begins as voluntary gathering can slowly become obligation. What begins as shared labor can become expectation. What begins as reverence can become social pressure. The more powerful the ritual center becomes, the more people must work to keep it alive, and the more difficult it becomes to admit that the burden is heavy. Stone asks for bodies. It asks for cutters, carriers, planners, watchers, food providers, tool makers, and those who clean and prepare the spaces. It asks for repeated attention. It asks people to step away from the immediate needs of family and survival. In a good season, this burden may feel meaningful. In a hard season, it may feel unfair. The same task that once brought honor can become exhaustion when hunger stands nearby. This is one of history's oldest tensions. The sacred needs labor, but labor needs food. If wild plants are less abundant in a certain year, if animals shift their routes, if water becomes harder to find, then every communal obligation becomes sharper. A person cannot eat prestige. A child cannot be fed with ceremony alone. When daily needs become difficult, the authority of ritual must prove itself in practical life. If it cannot, resentment may begin to form under respectful silence. No one has to say rebellion for rebellion to begin. A person can simply arrive late. A family can bring less food. A skilled worker can withhold effort. A group can attend another gathering place more often. A young person can listen less closely to an elder. Power weakens first in these small withdrawals, before any open break is visible. The sacred order still appears intact, but its force begins to thin. Leadership, too, may have grown more fragile. Early authority often depends on personal memory and trust. It is powerful when leaders are respected. It becomes unstable when those leaders die, fail, or compete. If a ritual specialist passes away, who has the right to speak in their place? If an elder's children disagree, whose memory is accepted? If a master carver leaves no equal apprentice, can the sacred forms still be renewed with the same force? Succession is a problem older than kingship. Even without crowns, people must decide who carries authority from one generation to another. In a small group, this may be settled by reputation. In a larger network, it becomes more dangerous. Different communities may support different figures. One lineage may claim older rights. Another may claim greater skill. A third may provide more food and demand more honor. The sacred hill becomes not only a place of unity, but also a prize of memory. Control over ritual space can create rivalry. Who may enter first? Who may touch the carved surfaces? Who may speak before the gathered people? Who may decide when a chamber is opened, repaired, changed, or closed? Such questions may seem subtle, but in a world where ritual carries authority, they matter deeply. To stand closer to the sacred is to stand closer to power. And power invites dispute. Inequality may have remained limited compared with later states, yet subtle differences can still wound. Some families may have gained prestige through ritual roles. Some craftspeople may have become famous. Some elders may have controlled important stories. Some groups may have supplied the most valued foods or materials. Over time, these distinctions could harden. A role inherited by respect can slowly become a privilege defended by custom. A society can feel equal in memory while becoming unequal in practice. The people themselves may not have described it in such terms. They may have spoken instead of proper order, ancestral right, sacred duty, or the old way. But every old way benefits someone. Those who stand at the center often see continuity. Those at the edges may feel distance. A visitor from a less honored group might enter the gathering with reverence, then leave with quiet bitterness. The hill could hold both feelings at once, awe and resentment, belonging and exclusion. This dual nature is not unusual. Sacred centers often unite communities by creating shared meaning, yet they also divide them by organizing access. The very spaces that make people feel joined can remind them that not all people stand in the same place. A chamber can gather the many, but its most charged point may belong to the few. A feast can feed everyone, but the order of distribution can reveal rank. Such divisions may have been manageable for a long time. Then conditions changed. The movement toward more settled life may have intensified pressure. As groups stayed longer in favored places, their relationship to land became less flexible. A mobile community can avoid conflict by moving away, at least sometimes. A more settled community cannot leave so easily. Stored food must be protected. Nearby dead must be remembered. Built spaces must be maintained. Children grow attached to specific places. Boundaries become emotional before they become legal. Attachment creates beauty. It also creates conflict. If two groups value the same spring, slope, hunting route, or sacred hill, the old arrangements may no longer satisfy everyone. A landscape once shared through seasonal movement can become crowded with claims. Not necessarily crowded by modern standards, but crowded in meaning. Each group has stories that prove belonging. Each group remembers labor given. Each group may feel that the ancestors stand with them. In such a world, memory can become a weapon. The builders of Karahan Tepe may have tried to manage these tensions through ceremony. Ritual can absorb conflict by giving it form. A feast can repair insult. A shared chant can soften division. A burial can renew solidarity. A building project can unite rival hands around a common task. For a while, these methods may have succeeded, but ritual cannot solve every strain. If demands keep growing, if resources become uncertain, if leadership becomes contested, if rival centers offer different opportunities, then the old system begins to tire. People may still honor the stones, yet no longer organize their entire social life around them. They may still tell the stories, yet tell them with less urgency. They may still come to the hill, but not in the same numbers or with the same trust. Exhaustion often looks like quietness, a chamber not repaired at once, a carving left unfinished, a gathering smaller than remembered, a path less worn. An elder speaking of old ceremonies to children who listen politely, but whose attention drifts toward new tasks. The change may be slow enough that no single generation calls it collapse. It is simply the sense that the world has become harder to hold together. Beneath the limestone, cracks do not need to be wide to matter. A small crack admits water. Water widens it. Seasons pass. The surface still looks strong, until one day a piece breaks away. Human systems can fracture in the same way. A grievance enters. A shortage deepens it. A contested ritual sharpens it. A death leaves a role empty. A rival hill draws followers. The outer form remains, while the inner cohesion weakens. Karahan Tepe's internal weakness may have been this slow accumulation, not failure of imagination, but the burden of success. Not the absence of belief, but too many demands placed upon belief. Not one broken rule, but many small shifts in how people gave labor, trusted leaders, shared food, and understood the sacred order. The hill had become powerful by gathering many lives into one pattern. Its vulnerability lay in the difficulty of keeping so many lives aligned. For a while, the carved faces still watched. The pillars still stood. The ceremonies may still have continued, though perhaps with altered meanings. People still walked the paths, still spoke the names of remembered places, still carried food and stories across the hills. Yet inside the system, confidence was no longer effortless. The work of belonging had become heavier. In the evening, a fire burns near the sacred spaces. An elder speaks, but a young listener looks away toward the darkening ridge. Somewhere beyond it, another community prepares another gathering, another future, another way of living. The hill remains sacred, but the human world around it is shifting. Stone can endure many things. Trust is more fragile. Trouble rarely comes from one direction. It approaches as hunger, rivalry, weather, memory, and distance, each moving at its own pace until they begin to meet. Around Karahan Tepe, the old ritual world may have faced pressures both within and beyond the hill country. Some pressures came from people who no longer accepted the same obligations. Others came from landscapes that no longer gave quite what they had once given. Together, they formed a slow tightening around the sacred order. The first sign may have been food, not famine in the dramatic sense, not bodies falling beside empty fires, but a subtler anxiety. A patch of wild grain ripens poorly. Gazelle herds pass farther away than expected. A dry season leaves certain springs weak. A storm damages stored food. A group arrives at a gathering with less to offer than custom requires. No single event destroys a world, but each one asks a question the old system must answer. Why should we give when we have little? That question can be dangerous. In a society held together by shared labor and ritual obligation, scarcity changes the meaning of generosity. Giving food in abundance brings honor. Giving food during shortage brings strain. Refusing to give may protect children, but damage alliances. Bringing too little may invite shame. Accepting too much may create debt that cannot be repaid. A sacred gathering depends on the transformation of food into meaning, but hungry bodies resist symbolism when the bowl is nearly empty. Conflict could begin in silence. A family keeps back part of its store. A hunting group withholds the best meat for its own camp. Visitors complain that their hosts no longer show proper respect. Hosts answer that visitors no longer bring proper gifts. Old alliances become brittle. Ritual words are still spoken, but the warmth behind them thins. People smile because custom demands it, while resentment gathers under the skin. External threats do not always wear the face of invaders. Sometimes they are neighboring communities growing stronger. Across the wider landscape, other hills, settlements, and gathering places may have competed for attention. A ritual center's influence depends on people believing that it remains necessary. If another place offers stronger alliances, better food access, more persuasive ceremonies, or less burdensome obligations, people may begin to drift. They do not need to reject Karahan Tepe openly. They only need to choose another path more often. A path less traveled begins to disappear. Rivalry between sacred places may have been subtle. One community boasts of a more powerful ceremony. Another claims older ancestors. Another offers marriage ties that bring practical advantage. Another controls access to better flint, water, or seasonal plants. In such a world, religion, economy, kinship, and geography are inseparable. A rival ritual center is not only a spiritual alternative, it is a different network of survival. The hill would still be honored, but honor can become memory rather than obedience. There may also have been open resistance, not necessarily war as later civilizations knew it, but disputes, refusals, threats, or small acts of violence. A visiting group denied access to an important space could become hostile. A lineage whose rights were questioned might leave and take followers. A disagreement over food distribution could turn into fighting at the edge of camp. Even a single death during a gathering could stain the place for years. Sacred landscapes are meant to contain tension, but they can also amplify it. When people fight in an ordinary place, the conflict may remain practical. When they fight near carved ancestors or powerful animal forms, the insult becomes cosmic. A broken taboo can demand repair. A spilled life can require explanation. Each side may claim the unseen powers favor them. The place that once united people may become the witness of their division. Climate added another kind of pressure. The early Holocene world was not fixed. Rainfall, vegetation, and animal populations shifted over generations. Some periods favored abundance, allowing larger gatherings and longer settlement. Other periods pressed communities toward new strategies. When old patterns no longer guaranteed enough food, people experimented. They watched wild grains more closely. They protected certain stands. They returned to productive places at precise times. They may have begun to encourage plants that had once been simply gathered. This gradual movement toward cultivation changed the balance of life. A person invested in a growing patch cannot wander away as easily. A family that stores more food must guard it. A community that stays longer in one place must negotiate waste, disease, conflict, and ownership. The rhythms of hunting and gathering do not vanish at once, but they begin to share space with new habits of tending, storing, and returning. The future enters quietly, through baskets of seed. Such change could weaken the old ritual network. If people become more attached to local fields or managed stands of grain, long journeys to distant ceremonies may become harder. If work around food production intensifies, fewer hands are available for monumental labor. If stored resources create new inequalities, authority may shift from ritual specialists toward those who control food. If settlement deepens, local shrines may matter more than regional gatherings. The sacred hill faces a new competitor, not another hill, the household. This is a profound transformation. In a mobile or semi-mobile world, large gathering places help knit scattered people together. In a more settled world, daily life gains new centers. Houses become places of memory. Burials may move closer to domestic spaces. Storage pits, grinding areas, and family lineages become increasingly important. The sacred does not disappear, but it may settle inward, closer to walls, hearths, and cultivated ground. Karahan Tepe's great spaces may have belonged to a world where gathering across distance was essential. As communities changed, that need may have changed with them. External pressures may also have come from new social forms. Groups experimenting successfully with cultivation could grow in population, occupy favorable locations longer, and defend resources more strongly. Their confidence might differ from that of older gathering networks. They could value land in new ways. They could judge ritual labor differently. They could look at a monumental hill and ask whether its demands still served the living. That question is quiet, but devastating. What if the old ceremonies no longer secured food? What if ancestors belonged not only to the hill, but to the house? What if the future lay not in returning to carved chambers, but in tending the same ground season after season? The conflict between old and new ways was probably not clean. The same people may have hunted, gathered, cultivated, built, feasted, and worshipped in overlapping patterns. A person could honor ancient ceremonies while experimenting with grain. A family could travel to the hill and also store food near home. The transformation was not a sudden replacement. It was a long braid of habits, some inherited, some newly learned, yet over time, balance shifts. The old network depends on movement, gathering, and shared attention. The new world depends increasingly on staying, producing, storing, and defending. The sacred hill still has power, but the center of gravity begins to move. A community that once measured belonging through pilgrimage and ceremony may begin to measure it through land, harvest, house, and descent. Rebellions in such a world may look like departures. A group stops coming. Another builds its own sacred space. Another keeps its food local. Another follows leaders whose authority comes from storage and settlement rather than ritual memory. No great army needs to march against Karahan Tepe. The hill can be threatened by absence. Absence is one of the quietest forms of collapse. Imagine a season when fewer fires burn around the gathering ground. The chambers are prepared, but the crowd is smaller. Elders notice. Organizers speak. Hopefully. The ceremony proceeds, and perhaps it remains beautiful. But beauty cannot entirely conceal the missing bodies. A song meant for many voices sounds thinner. Food once distributed widely now sits in smaller piles. Paths that were noisy in earlier seasons lie still under grass. Those who come may feel the change before they name it. They look toward the ridges, waiting for groups that do not arrive. They ask whether a spring failed, whether illness came, whether a dispute kept people away, whether another gathering drew them elsewhere. Each explanation may be true for someone, but together, they reveal something larger. The world that made the hill powerful is loosening. The carved animals remain. The human heads remain. But the living web around them is under strain from hunger, rivalry, shifting climate, changing settlement, and new ideas about how humans should live with the land. External threat and internal resistance become one movement, pressing from the edges and hollowing from within. The old sacred order does not end in a single night. It becomes harder to sustain, harder to explain, harder to gather around with the same unquestioned devotion. The wind moves across the plateau. It passes over stones, abandoned ash, worn paths, and chambers that still wait for voices. Somewhere, people are planting more carefully. Somewhere else, a rival fire burns on another hill. Somewhere, a family chooses not to travel because the grain must be watched, the children must be fed, and the old obligations feel far away. The world is not ending. It is changing shape. In the end, Karahan Tepe did not fall like a city under siege. There was no final gate to burn, no palace roof collapsing in flame, no king fleeing through a hidden passage with treasure in his arms. The end of this world was older, quieter, and harder to see. It came through transformation. It came as people changed where they lived, how they fed themselves, how they remembered the dead, and where they believed the center of life should be. The stones remained. The human world around them moved on. A sacred place can lose power without being destroyed. It can become less visited, less repaired, less central to the rhythm of seasons. A chamber once filled with voices can fall silent for longer stretches of time. A path once pressed down by many feet can soften beneath grass. The old ceremonies may continue in reduced form, then in altered form, then as memories spoken by elders whose listeners are already drawn toward different futures. This kind of ending is not sudden enough for legend, but it is powerful. Across the region, human life was entering a new arrangement: farming, settlement, storage, and the more permanent household began to reshape society. People were no longer only returning to sacred hills. They were returning to tended ground. They were watching crops, guarding stored food, raising children in places occupied for longer periods, and building new relationships with walls, hearths, and fields. The sacred did not vanish, but it began to live in different spaces. The house gained weight. The field gained memory. The ancestors may have moved closer to domestic life. The dead, once imagined through gathering places, animal powers, or stone heads, could become tied more directly to settlement, lineage, and inherited ground. A family that stays in one place longer begins to think differently about belonging. The earth beneath the dwelling becomes personal. The stored harvest becomes future. The household becomes a small universe of labor, memory, danger, and hope. In such a world, the old monumental hill no longer answered every need. Karahan Tepe may have been abandoned gradually, intentionally closed, ritually buried, or simply left to the slow patience of weather and soil. In prehistoric sites of this kind, burial itself can be meaningful. To fill a sacred space is not always to discard it. Sometimes it is to seal it. To cover a powerful place may be an act of respect, fear, completion, or renewal. The earth that hides can also protect, but whatever the intention. Silence came, dust settled. Rains washed sediment into hollows. Plants rooted in cracks. Animals passed over spaces where people had once gathered in awe. Seasons moved across the hill with no concern for human memory. The carved forms, once seen by firelight and shadow, disappeared beneath the ground. The heads no longer watched the living. The pillars no longer organized bodies in ritual stillness. The world forgot. Not immediately, not completely at first. Nearby communities may have remembered that the hill was strange, old, dangerous, or sacred. Stories may have lingered without clear explanation. A place can remain in local memory long after its original meaning is lost. But centuries passed. Then millennia. Languages changed. New villages rose. New gods were named. New dead were buried. The landscape filled with later histories that did not know the old one beneath their feet. Time is the greatest covering. It does not only bury stone, it buries meaning. Empires rose far away and nearer by. Cities grew along rivers. Kings carved their victories into monuments. Traders crossed deserts. Armies marched. Temples rose with priests, offerings, accounts, and written prayers. Bronze gave way to iron. Roads hardened. Coins moved from hand to hand. The world became louder with names, dates, dynasties, and declarations. Compared with such records, Karahan Tepe lay mute beneath the soil. Yet age does not mean absence. It waited. Beneath the surface, the limestone held its secret with extraordinary patience. The carvings did not remember in the way people remember, but they endured. They survived because stone can hold intention after language dies. A mark made by a human hand can remain long after the hand itself is beyond imagining. In that survival, there is something almost tender. The makers vanished completely, yet their gestures stayed. Then, in the modern age, the ground was opened again. Archaeologists came not with myth, but with tools, measurements, notebooks, cameras, careful hands, and questions. They brushed soil from carved surfaces and found that the old world was not as simple as the old timelines had suggested. The site did not fit comfortably into the familiar order of farming first, village next, temple later. Here was monumentality near the dawn of settled life. Here was ritual ambition before the full rise of the city. Here was social imagination carved into stone before writing could explain it. Discovery is not only the finding of objects, it is the disturbance of certainty. Karahan Tepe changed the way scholars and listeners imagine the beginning of civilization. It suggested that human beings may have gathered around sacred vision before they gathered around fields in the fully agricultural sense. It showed that people often called prehistoric were capable of organizing labor, designing powerful spaces, sustaining shared symbols, and shaping a landscape of meaning across generations. It reminded the modern world that intelligence leaves many kinds of traces. Not all of them are words. The legacy of Karahan Tepe is therefore not a single answer. It is a widening of the question. What is civilization? Is it writing, law, farming, architecture, social hierarchy, trade, religion, memory, or the ability to gather strangers into a shared idea? Perhaps civilization is not born in one invention, but in the slow weaving together of many human needs: food, fear, death, beauty, belonging, authority, hope. The people of Karahan Tepe did not build a city in the later sense. They built a threshold. On one side lay the long world of hunters, gatherers, mobile groups, remembered landscapes, and close attention to animal and season. On the other side lay villages, cultivation, storage, deeper settlement, and eventually the crowded river worlds of written history. Karahan Tepe stands between them, not as a simple bridge, but as a reminder that the human mind was already vast before the city arrived. Its ruins ask us to be humble. They ask us not to mistake silence for emptiness. They ask us not to think that people without writing had no history, or that people without metal had no power, or that people without kings had no organization. They ask us to imagine knowledge carried in song, gesture, craft, memory, and ceremony. They ask us to see civilization not only as a structure of walls, but as a structure of attention. And now the hill is quiet again. The wind passes over the limestone. The sun lowers over the Anatolian plateau. Shadows gather in the carved spaces. Human heads, once hidden, face the open air. Animals in stone wait with the patience of things that have already outlived every name given to them. Around them, modern voices come and go, careful, curious, and temporary. Even discovery is only another season. The stones will remain longer than we will. What Karahan Tepe leaves behind is a feeling as much as a fact. It leaves the strange comfort of knowing that human beings have always searched for meaning beneath the sky. Long before cities, we gathered. Long before writing, we remembered. Long before kings, we made places that taught us how small and how connected we were. The old builders are gone. Their world has changed beyond recognition. But in the silence of the hill, something of them still lingers. Not as a complete message, not as an answer finally solved, but as a calm and enduring presence. Stone faces, empty chambers, animal shadows, the memory of fires no longer burning, the sense that civilization began not with certainty, but with wonder. Night comes softly, the plateau darkens, and Karahan Tepe returns to the deep quiet from which it rose, holding its mysteries beneath the stars, while history listens.